All right, let's dive right into this explainer on the 2026 NATO Summit in Ankara, Turkey. We're looking at a pivotal moment here, where the world's most exclusive security club is frankly radically changing its membership fees. Set against the backdrop of the ongoing war in Ukraine, major shifts in U.S. strategic priorities, and some pretty intense internal debates, this summit is literally reshaping the operational and financial future of the whole transatlantic alliance.
As the U.S., under the Trump administration, aggressively demands that allies shoulder their fair share, we've got to ask the critical question driving this entire explainer. Does unprecedented new defense spending actually buy a sovereign European umbrella? Or are these nations just paying significantly more to keep renting the U.S. umbrella for their security?
Section 1. The 5% reality, raising of dues. To grasp the sheer scale of this shift, we really have to look at how incredibly fast the macroeconomic baseline has changed for the alliance, moving from peacetime maintenance to an era of rapid rearmament.
Think back to 2014. At the Wales Summit, NATO established a baseline, urging members to spend 2% of their GDP on defense. Fast forward just over a decade to the 2025 Hague Summit, and we leap to a massive 5% mandate. And now, in 2026 at Ankara, the focus is entirely on how to actually execute and enforce these enormous financial targets. We've gone from a modest 2% goal to, essentially, a full-blown peacetime economic mobilization.
So the absolute crucial point here is this new 5% of GDP target for defense and security spending. And let's be clear, this is not a suggestion. It is a strict mandate that member states must reach by 2035. Secretary General Mark Rutte notes that European allies and Canada are currently operating at around a 4% aggregate, but pushing every single individual nation over that 5% finish line, that is proving to be a monumental challenge.
What's really fascinating about this new target is how it's actually split up. You've got 3.5% dedicated strictly to traditional core military outputs, tanks, jets, personnel, equipment maintenance. The remaining 1.5% is carved out for broader security and resilience spending. That covers vital investments in cyber networks, civil preparedness, and critical infrastructure, basically acknowledging that modern militaries rely heavily on civilian logistics.
But of course, independent watchdogs are already raising some major red flags. Experts at SIPRI, the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, warned that the incredibly vague definition of this 1.5% resilience category is basically a recipe for creative accounting. There's a very real risk that governments, feeling the fiscal squeeze, might just relabel routine civilian infrastructure, like highways or commercial ports, as security spending just to hit their NATO targets on paper, without adding any real military lethality.
And you can see exactly why that loophole matters when you look at the staggering budget increases required to hit that 5% threshold. Germany needs a 164% increase, France 144%, and Italy a whopping 211% jump from their previous baselines. For nations like France and Italy, which already carry public debt levels well over 113 and 135% of their GDP respectively, this is a massive, severe structural fiscal strain.
To put that abstract math into perspective, let's look at Germany. Under this new mandate, Germany's required defense budget will have to hit roughly $329 billion. To put that in context, that newly required defense budget would literally eclipse their entire current estimated public spending on education, which sits at $283 billion. Reaching this target requires the kind of brutal political trade-offs we rarely see outside of actual wartime.
Section 2. The defense shopping spree, addressing the bottlenecks. Faced with all this immense pressure to prove compliance, member states aren't just adjusting spreadsheets anymore. They are actively launching into enormous new defense procurements at the summit's Defense Industry Forum.
Canada is bringing a prime example of this to the summit. They're making the largest defense purchase in their nation's history, selecting Germany's TKMS as the preferred supplier for a fleet of up to 12 submarines. Now, while the final contracts are still pending, the estimated lifetime cost of this program is a staggering $100 billion. I mean, it is a colossal injection of cash into the European defense industrial base.
But here's the catch. This whole transatlantic shopping spree is hitting some severe bottlenecks. Following the recent U.S. conflict with Iran, Washington is heavily prioritizing the replenishment of its own domestic stockpiles, which is causing serious delays in arms shipments to key European allies. And this dynamic is directly incentivizing European capitals to bypass American contractors entirely and accelerate their own indigenous defense production to get around these critical supply chain risks.
Yet, even the most willing nations are really struggling to find the cash. Take the UK, for example. Outgoing Prime Minister Keir Starmer laid out a plan allocating an extra £15 billion for defense, but it relied heavily on reallocating existing capital. Now, the incoming administration under Andy Burnham inherits that plan, but they also inherit a daunting £4.7 billion unfunded gap. With severe pressure against using debt to fund the military, finding that money is an immediate, real-world fiscal crisis.
Section 3. The Urgent Reality. Ukraine's Push for Freya. Because look, while Western European politicians are busy debating decade-long budgets and complex procurement contracts, the reality on the ground in Ukraine demands immediate operational solutions. They simply don't have until 2035.
The tragic events right before the summit underscore this perfectly. On July 6, a devastating barrage of Russian missile and drone strikes hit Kyiv, resulting in at least 22 fatalities. This attack starkly exposed Ukraine's acute, desperate shortage of ballistic interceptors. NATO has pledged €70 billion annually in military support, sure, but physical interceptors are what's needed in the sky right now today.
Sort of bypass these Western supply constraints, President Zelensky is using the Ankara Summit to push hard for local production. Specifically, Ukraine is promoting the Freya air defense strategy. By developing FP7.X interceptors locally with the Ukrainian firm Firepoint, they're aiming to hit interception speeds of 2,000 meters per second at just a fraction of the cost of those scarce Western systems. The goal is to fully integrate this indigenous tech directly into NATO's Secure Communications Network, Link 16.
Section 4. The Host with Leverage. Turkey's Balancing Act. Right at the center of all these swirling dynamics, between American pressure, European budgets, and Ukrainian urgency, is the summit's host, Turkey, aggressively positioning itself as an absolutely indispensable regional power. Ankara is brilliantly using this platform to showcase its booming defense industrial base. Get this. Turkish defense and airspace exports to NATO countries surged by an incredible 47.1% over the past year, hitting $10.9 billion. Turkish Defense Minister Yaşar Güler is out there actively pitching their advanced drones and armored vehicles as the perfect, readily available solution to fill Europe's glaring capability gaps. However, as we objectively analyze the host nation based on the reports, we really have to acknowledge a stark contrast. Externally, Turkey holds immense leverage as an indispensable defense supplier and a key geopolitical bridge to Gulf partners. But internally, organizations like Human Rights Watch have heavily scrutinized the domestic climate leading up to the summit. They're pointing to strict pre-summit protest bans in Ankara, along with mass arrests that have included journalists and even a prominent comedian. It's a highly complex balancing act, projecting external strength amidst these internal clampdowns.
Section 5. Whose umbrella is it? The strategic paradox. Which brings us right back to the overarching narrative of the summit and the core strategic paradox facing the alliance today, especially as the U.S. military actively adjusts its global footprint.
The Trump administration is enforcing a very strict burden-sharing doctrine, and we're seeing tangible shifts in U.S. posture. We're talking about a heavy pivot toward the Indo-Pacific and actually ending rotational infantry brigade deployments in places like Romania. The U.S. is demanding that Europe take the primary point on its own conventional deterrence. It's a clear signal, a refusal to indefinitely subsidize European security at the expense of American domestic priorities.
So if Europe actually manages to slash its domestic budgets, raise taxes, and meet this grueling 5% mandate by 2035, we really have to ask, are they actually building an independent sovereign defense architecture that can stand entirely on its own 2 feet? Or are they still going to rely heavily on American intelligence, American logistics, and ultimately the American nuclear deterrent?
As the Ankara summit wraps up and these leaders head home to face their taxpayers, this is the provocative question you should take away from this explainer today. Will this unprecedented peacetime economic mobilization forge true European strategic autonomy? Or has the cost of admission simply gone up for Europe to just rent the same American umbrella? It's a 5% gamble that will absolutely define global security for the next decade.